Today, rugby player Kurtley Beale to face court on 4 sexual assault charges.
Olympian Peter Bol stresses his innocence after failing in an out-of-competition drug test.
Google's parent company cuts 12,000 jobs in the latest Silicon Valley shakeup.
He's done it!
The new generation prevails. Sebastian Korda knocks Daniil Medvedev out of the Australian Open.
And in this hour, we will be looking at the legacy of Jacinda Ardern as rivals race to determine the next Prime Minister of New Zealand. Good morning. It is Saturday, the 21st of January. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim.
And I'm Dan Borsche. You're watching Weekend Breakfast, coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people. And it's great to have your company this morning. Our top stories on ABC News, and rugby union star Kurtley Beale is due to face court today after being charged with sexually assaulting a woman in a Bondi hotel in December. The 34-year-old will appear in bail court in Parramatta today.
A man charged of a fatal stabbing in Sydney southwest is expected to face a bedside court hearing today. Emergency services were called to a house in Roselands on Wednesday and found the body of a 91-year-old man. A 24-year-old man arrested nearby remains under police guard in hospital, where he's being treated for injuries sustained prior to his arrest.
A man accused of killing Cairns woman Toya Cordingley will learn next Tuesday whether he'll be extradited from India to Australia to face trial for her murder. Rajwinder Singh has appeared in a court in the Indian capital New Delhi, which has reserved the matter until next week. The former Queensland nurse was arrested by Indian police in November after the Queensland government announced a $1 million reward for information leading to his arrest. He's already made a written submission to the court that he is willing to be extradited to Australia to contest the case.
Nominations for candidates to replace Jacinda Ardern as New Zealand's Prime Minister have now closed. There was no clear successor when Ms Ardern resigned earlier this week. The Labour caucus is expected to vote for a new leader tomorrow.
Germany has denied trying to block the shipment of German-made Leopard tanks to Ukraine to use in its war against Russia. The country's defence minister has been attending a meeting of 50 of Ukraine's defence allies at the Ramstein airbase in Germany, where more military support for Ukraine was discussed. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has pleaded with allies to send 300 battle tanks. Germany's defence minister says there's a lot to consider before agreeing to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine.
And we have to balance all the pros and cons before we decide things like that, just like that. This is nothing else. And I'm very sure that there will be a decision in the short term, but I don't know why, and I don't know how the decision will look. The Germany will not stop its support. Germany will not relent. We will support Ukraine so long as it is necessary and the war is over.
But to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, the time spent debating a new shipment of weapons to his embattled country could be better used fighting. Despite thanking Europe for its efforts in funding the war so far, the Ukrainian president says time is a critical factor as the fighting drags into its second year.
Hundreds of thank you are not hundreds of tanks. All of us can use thousands of words in discussions, but I cannot put words instead of guns that are needed against Russian artillery, or instead of the anti-aircraft missile that are needed to protect people from Russian airstrikes. And I am truly grateful to all of you for the weapons you have provided. Every unit helps to save our people from terror.
Independent MPs in the Lebanese parliament have begun a sit-in to pressure the main political factions to end a standoff that stopped the election of a new president for almost 3 months. They're responding to another failed attempt to elect a new leader, the 11th failure since October last year. The 13 MPs now say they will remain protesting until their opinions on the country's new leader are recognised.
This is a big step today. by using a new method to pressure the political class to elect a president first and then approve laws for reforms, to continue with efforts to see how we can revive this country. Everything was carrying on as if there were no issues. I think this step by reformers in Parliament has broken the deadlock.
20 people have been killed, 8 others still missing after an avalanche in Tibet. 53 survivors have been found, 5 seriously injured. The avalanche occurred on a section of road, causing people and vehicles to become stranded. The region has dispatched nearly 700 emergency service workers so far, and the rescue work is still ongoing.
Believers in the extraterrestrial have had a bit of excitement in Turkey. A UFO-like shape over the northwest city of Bursa provided a brief burst of wonder before being busted as nothing but a cloud. The wave-like pattern is known as a lenticular cloud and is one of meteorology's rarest occurrences. The cylindrical craft remained intact for about an hour before disappearing from the sky and returning to its home planet.
That's a bit of an anomaly, isn't it? It's quite a bummer because, you know, yes, you would look at that and you would go, oh, I'm witnessing a UFO.
Yeah.
And then you get excited.
Such an unusual...
on Instagram and you know, it's all over social media and then you realize, oh, it's just a cloud.
I'm worried that something further might be coming. We've seen the end of days films, haven't we, about...
yeah, I've got my bunker ready. Is yours?
Have you? No?
Yeah, right. It's
no,
all
but I know where
stocked
you
up.
live, so I'll be popping over there.
Come on over. Come on over.
Very good.
It is time now to talk sport with Daniela Intini. Now, Danny, we are going to start with this shocking news about the Australian Olympian Peter Ball, who's been suspended.
Yeah, it's an absolutely shocking story in that it just took me by surprise. He's maintained his innocence. He's denied taking any prohibited substance, but at the moment he is provisionally banned, and this is following a positive test for an EPO. He finished 4th in the 800 metres at the Tokyo Olympic and has this provisional suspension after returning this positive result for the EPO in a test taken last October. He won silver at the Commonwealth Games. He's saying that he remains optimistic the process will exonerate him, and he's requested an analysis of a second B sample, which will take place next month. So he's got a lot of supporters out there. We'll wait and see what happens.
Okay.
And in the cycling, Danny, a new leader in the Tour Down Under.
Yeah, Jay Vine, he is an absolute superstar. So he finished 3rd in stage 3, but it was enough to take the overall lead because he was trailing by 3 seconds initially. So he has a 15-second lead over Spain's Pello Bilbao, who won stage 3, a 116-kilometre stage. And Jay Vine, a real superstar. He was leading the King of the Mountain in Spain's Vuelta last year, but then crashed, and he'd won a cycling e-contract. He's really, he's a big name.
Yeah. Does seem that way. Danny, thanks very much. We'll see you a little later in the show. But let's now check on the markets with David Chow, who's also in the studio with us. Now, David, it looks like Silicon Valley is just not doing so well at all. We've seen a lot of layoffs from the major tech giants, and Google is the latest one.
Indeed it is, Fawzia. So Google has announced that it's cutting 6% of its workforce, or in headcount numbers, that's 12,000 jobs lost. And Google is blaming this on what it calls a difficult economic reality. So like many other tech companies and Wall Street firms, Google is expecting a recession to happen later this year. So it's preparing for that. And in order to boost its profit, which will be hard to make, it'll need to cut costs. And people are the first that will suffer from that. So the first sign of any problems happened late last year when Google decided to cancel the launch or the development of its next generation laptop called the Google Pixel Book. So it was meant to come out later this year. And then a few days ago, it announced it was deferring bonuses. So normally in January, Google employees get paid 100% of their bonus, but this time they're only getting paid 80%, with the rest to be paid in March. So that was the first sign something wasn't right. And then overnight, there was that announcement of 12,000 job cuts. Now, most of them will happen in the US at first, where Google is based. It plans to cut its workforce globally, but says these job losses outside of America, they'll take longer to affect because of local laws and practices they need to observe. Every country has different labour laws they need to adhere to. Now, in wider context, Google's job cuts are quite up there, especially when we compare it with the other tech giants that have announced job losses recently. So take a look. Amazon cut even more workers in the last few days. 18,000 jobs lost at the US online shopping giant. And comparable to that, there's Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, down 12,000 jobs. And also on this list, Meta, or Facebook as it's better known, has shed 11,000 jobs recently, as well as Microsoft, down 11,000 jobs. So similar problems as well, because mainly it has to do with the fact that inflation is so high. That's why central banks around the world have been forced to lift interest rates aggressively. So companies are cutting back on their advertising spending, and that hits companies like, say, Twitter and Google pretty hard, because that's how they earn money, especially on their search engine and their YouTube video directory.
Yeah, there's so many jobs going there. Let's talk cryptocurrency now. There's more trouble there. Another bankruptcy.
Yeah, I know. It seems like a new one every week. So the latest is a crypto lender called Genesis. It's filed for bankruptcy in the US. It owes about $3.4 billion to its customers, and since mid-November, stuff wasn't, I guess, going to plan, because customers were not allowed to withdraw their money. And this is all a ripple effect, because its troubles relate to the collapse of another crypto firm called Three Arrows Capital, which went bankrupt in June last year. And this Genesis company was owed $1.2 billion by Three Arrows, which collapsed. And it also has exposure to FTX, another major high-profile collapse. So I guess they all have assets linked with each other. And as we know, FTX is being, well, its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, is being investigated for fraud and being prosecuted in the United States. And also, to make matters worse for Genesis, it's also being investigated by the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the corporate regulator. They've been charged for breaching securities laws in the way it's been marketing and selling cryptocurrencies. So it is quite a bit of a mess in crypto land, I got to say.
It certainly is. It seems lawless more than anything else too, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much. It's often been described as the wild west of finance, because there's very little regulation, and that's why a lot of people are getting burnt from this. And that's, I guess, another example that's going to lead to increased calls for regulation, no doubt.
Great.
Yeah.
David, thanks very much for that.
No worries.
Hey, it's great to have your company on this Saturday morning, and of course it's great to have you back on the desk as well.
And great to be back
with you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Jo is having a little bit of a break. It's her birthday this weekend.
Happy birthday,
If you're watching Jo this early in the morning, what are you doing up this early in the morning?
Go back to bed.
But happy birthday anyway. Still to come here on Weekend Breakfast, it is the priceless artefact that many had feared would have been lost in WA's massive floods. But the Ngora canvas, it's an 80 square metre artwork. It's deemed a vital cultural record for the Kimberley's First Nations groups. And miraculously, look how beautiful it is. Miraculously, it's been saved completely unscathed, Dan.
Just a breathtaking piece of artwork there that connects through to so many different groups and stories. And as you can see there are these song lines and storylines that weave not just across different clan groups, but across the regions, capturing this very land, the country that we're seeing here that has been so affected by those devastating floods there. Well, we're going to be hearing more about that rescue effort a little later in the show, as well as checking in on the biggest stories from Australia's First Nations communities right across this week. Tom Forrest is going to be here. We're really looking forward to having you down.
Tom Forrest, of course, otherwise known as Outback Tom. He's out back here in Sydney now, so we've claimed him, and he's going to be, for now, he's going to be in the studio with us a little later in the show. First, though, let's check the weather in the capitals for you. Brisbane, you can expect a mostly sunny day, some showers clearing in Sydney, cloudy skies over Canberra, mostly sunny in Melbourne, showers for you in Hobart, warm in Adelaide, getting to 37 over there in WA Perth, and a possible thunderstorm for Darwin.
Dismissed as New Zealand's accidental Prime Minister, she became an icon for girls and women around the world and heralded a new focus on kindness. But after 5 years in office, Jacinda Ardern this week announced she was resigning from the country's top job.
It's about knowing when you've got what it takes and what is needed to lead, but also having the courage to know when you don't.
Her supporters will always remember her as a strong, progressive female icon.
A lot of people will be wondering, are you two meeting just because, you're similar in age and, got a lot of, common stuff there, when you got into politics and stuff? Or can Kiwis actually expect to see more deals between our two countries down the line? Because
my first question is, I wonder whether or not anyone ever asked Barack Obama and John Key if they met because they were of similar age.
You have now chosen your career over having a family. If you're an employer of a company, you need to know that type of thing from the women that you're employing, because legally you have to give them maternity leave.
I decided to talk about it. It was my choice. But for other women, it is totally unacceptable in 2017 to say that women should have to answer that question in the workplace.
Does it feel momentous that you are the first Prime Minister to walk in a pride parade?
Probably should have happened a while ago.
I know, it does feel crazy to me.
There are times whenever I've heard Jacinda Ardern do a clapback, I want to go, you go, girl. I know, exactly. And you know she's put you in place, but in a really polite way. So her shock announcement took many people by surprise, but probably not Madeleine Chapman. Madeleine is the biographer and an author of the book entitled Jacinda Ardern, A New Kind of Leader. Madeleine joins us now on Weekend Breakfast. Great to have you on the show, Madeleine. How are you going?
Kia ora, how are you?
Yeah, good. Listen, in your book, you said that Jacinda Ardern never wanted to be Prime Minister. I wonder, was that the usual sort of political spin, or is that really her personality?
I think at the time we all thought it was the usual political spin. Every MP says they don't want to be Prime Minister. Most of them, if not all, do. And so I think everyone sort of took it with a grain of salt that, of course, she would say that, because if you're, quite far from being Prime Minister, you don't want to look too confident. But even as it got closer and closer, she still insisted that she didn't want to. And she was quite specific about it, usually for family reasons. She didn't want to have children while she was Prime Minister. She wanted to have a home life. And the fact that she became Prime Minister, I think, is despite that, rather than that being part of some sort of comms plan.
I want to come back to Jacinda Ardern in just a moment, but for now, though, I want to talk about the fact that the nominations for her replacement has just closed this morning and this hour, and those in the possible running to replace her are the former COVID Minister Chris Hipkins, current Police Minister Kiri Allen, Transport Minister Michael Wood as well. I want to get your take on who's the likely successor, as the interim Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party.
I think everyone here agrees that the likely successor is Chris Hipkins, who has had many portfolios and was most recently the Minister for the COVID-19 response. So New Zealand has seen a lot of Chris Hipkins acting as kind of on behalf of the government. So he is the natural successor. I think Kiri Allen and Michael Wood are perhaps slightly longer shots, and it could be that they don't even nominate themselves at all. So there is a sense that we may have a confirmed Prime Minister even today, because he's the only nominated party.
Right, so let's come back to Jacinda Ardern, and she is an icon for women all over the world, and she always faced the questions about being a young female Prime Minister, a young female leader, and yet she always very politely, as we saw a little earlier, put down those questions and was able to put people in their place in a very polite way. Is that part, again, of this political spin? Did she learn to do that, or was that just Jacinda Ardern knowing, too, that, a rude clapback would not be good optics-wise?
I think she has always been an excellent communicator, even at high school, or even going into university and being like a youth MP. And people would usually downplay that and say that, well, communications is not necessarily the one thing you need to be a good Prime Minister. But as she's shown, if you are an excellent communicator, especially in times of crises or in sort of these lighter media moments where she's able to have a very quick comeback, it goes a long way. Those are the things that go global. I mean, those are the events that you showed in your package earlier. So it's those things that actually can make quite a big stamp, more so than I think people would have thought, perhaps before the age of social media.
Look, her resignation took many people by surprise. Let's listen to her parting words.
I want to finish with a simple thank you to New Zealanders for giving me this opportunity to serve and to take on what has and will always be the greatest role of my life. I hope in return, I leave behind a belief that you can be kind but strong, empathetic but decisive, optimistic but focused, that you can be your own kind of leader, one that knows when it's time to go.
Madeline, do you think she's paved the way for a new kind of leader, as your book suggests?
I think so. I think New Zealanders, there's a whole generation of New Zealanders who have only had her as a Prime Minister, so she is what they believe a Prime Minister should be. So I think potentially reverting back to a classic, older, more, maybe grumpy vibe in a Prime Minister will not be as well received now that we've seen that you can be the Prime Minister and mostly act like, just a regular person. So Chris Hipkins as the successor, he's pretty similar to that. He went out jogging yesterday morning when everyone was wondering if he would be Prime Minister, and he was wearing a hoodie and some wraparound sunnies and generally not looking that great, but it didn't seem to be a big factor for him, and everyone quite liked that casual nature. So I think, she certainly allowed for it, but that doesn't mean that everyone can be that type of Prime Minister, because you do have to be an excellent communicator, and she was quite unique in that. So some may try to be that kind, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be very good at it, I think.
All right, Madeline, it's great getting your insights into Jacinda Ardern. Thank you so much for being with us here on Weekend Breakfast as well. That's Madeline Chapman, their biographer and author of Jacinda Ardern, A New Kind of Leader.
Germany has denied it's blocking the shipment of Leopard tanks to Ukraine to support the war effort. The Ukrainian president, along with Western allies, have been appealing for the vehicles, and pressure is building on Berlin to send them.
This is what Kiev wants, but can't yet have. German-made Leopard 2 tanks, as part of hopes for hundreds of Western battle tanks to help defend their country and take back their land. Britain broke the mould, pledging 14 challengers. But for Ukraine, that alone isn't enough.
Hundreds of thank you are not hundreds of tanks. All of us can use thousands of words in discussions, but I cannot put words instead of guns that are needed against Russian artillery.
It was a direct appeal to this meeting of defence chiefs, but Berlin gets to decide where tanks made in Germany can go, even those bought by other countries.
Minister, why is Berlin so hesitant on this issue?
We are not really hesitating. We are just very carefully in balance and all the pros and contras. We are not talking just about delivering anything to anybody. This is a new kind of measure we would choose.
Domestic politics, Germany's past and a fear of escalating the conflict may all play into Berlin's caution. But this meeting was about more than tanks, with much wider pledges of military aid and an air of urgency.
They've not made a decision on the provision of Leopard tanks. What we're really focused on is making sure that Ukraine has the capability that it needs to be successful right now.
The NATO military alliance sees this as a pivotal moment.
There is a need for support to Ukraine to enable them not only to survive, but actually to retake territory to win this war.
But there's a lot of talk, of course, about a Russian spring offensive. But do you think Ukraine can take back territory this year?
Absolutely, and that's the reason why NATO allies are and partners are providing significantly more support to Ukraine.
This frontline Ukrainian unit is using a Soviet-era tank. They're worn and hungry for more modern equipment, anticipating bigger battles to come.
It is time now to talk sport with Daniela Intilli. Danny, there's been more upsets at the Australian Open.
Yeah, it has been a tournament of upsets. Men's 7th seed Daniil Medvedev has been knocked out of the tournament, beaten by 29th seed Sebastian Korda from the United States in the 3rd round. In the women's draw, 24th seed Victoria Azarenka is into the 4th round after beating the 10th seed Madison Keys at Rod Laver Arena last night. Joining me live from Melbourne is Luke Saville. Good morning, Luke, and welcome back to Weekend Breakfast.
Good morning, Danny. Thanks for having me on the show.
Pleasure. Before we talk about those matches, I want to congratulate you and Alex Bolt on winning your doubles match at the Australian Open yesterday, and you're playing at that 2nd round again today.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great to be out on Key Arena for our 1st round. It was a little bit surprising being on that sort of that big of a court for our 1st round, but it was a great atmosphere out there, and yeah, we played Diego Schwartzman and Federico Correa, 2 quality singles players. So we knew it wasn't going to be easy, but yeah, Bolty and I, we took care of our serve out there, didn't get broken, and very happy to be through to the 2nd round today.
You and Bolt are friends for a while. How are you feeling about your match today?
It's definitely a tough one. We play the number 4 seeds, the Croatians, Mektic and Pavic, Grand Slam champions, but we know they're beatable. We saw Kyrgios and Kokkinakis beat them last year in the 3rd round here at the Australian Open. So yeah, it's definitely a tough task, but we're combining very well, and especially in doubles, the margins are so fine. So we're very confident, very happy how we played yesterday, and hoping to keep that momentum going.
And look, let's talk about the singles with those upsets. Sebastian Korda, he's the son of the former Australian Open champion Peter Korda, and such a rising star.
Yeah, it really is. It's not a huge surprise in my eyes. Sebastian Korda is one of the hottest prospects coming through, one of the brightest ATP players for sure. Still so young, and he won the Australian Open Juniors here a few years back. And obviously his dad and even his 2 sisters are quality golfers. So some great sporting genes in that family. But yeah, he had a match point against Novak Djokovic 2 weeks ago in the Adelaide International. Didn't quite get that one, but he's definitely showing some very promising signs, and he has to be one of the favourites for the title going forward. Indeed.
And of course, a few Aussies in action coming up. Alex de Minaur and Alexei Popyrin hoping to progress to the next round.
Yeah, Alex de Minaur, the Demon. He's been one of our top players for a few years now. And this is exactly where he wants to be, the 3rd round of the Australian Open. He's put in a really tough pre-season. And I really like this matchup against Bonzi. He's knocked him off a few times, and hoping he can do the same today, 3rd on Rod Laver Arena. And Alexei Popyrin, what a story, beating Taylor Fritz 2 days ago in the 2nd round there, the number 8 seed. So yeah, he's got a very big game, Alexei Popyrin, great kid. So hoping he can sort of take advantage of that draw. That's definitely opened up quite a bit.
And your wife, Daria Saville, recovering from an injury. She was playing so well. How's she going?
Yeah, a really unfortunate one. A tough break there for sure. Suffering the ACL a few months ago, and obviously that's a 9-month injury. So that'll have her coming back around middle of the year. So a very tough time of the year for her to be sitting out, no doubt. There's some photos of her taking Tofu, our dog, through Rod Laver Arena. I think a little bit frowned upon, but she got an exemption that day. But yeah, she'll be back. She's got a protected ranking of around 50, so she's just rehabbing right now, trying to get to the knee as healthy as possible, and then she'll be raring to go the back 6 months of this year.
Well, great to see Dasha and Tofu there mingling with some of the best. And best of luck with your match today. Thanks for speaking to us on Game Day, Luke.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for having me, guys.
Luke Saville there.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thanks, Danny. Looking around the country for today, in Queensland, widespread showers and thunderstorms over much of the state. Below average temperatures for southern and central districts, slightly above average in the northwest and near average elsewhere. In New South Wales and the ACT, showers and thunderstorms in the west. Severe thunderstorms likely in the northwest with a risk of localised heavy falls. A shower or two along the coast and adjacent ranges. The chance of a thunderstorm about the far southern ranges and the slopes. In Victoria, isolated afternoon and evening showers and thunderstorms near and north of the ranges. Mild to warm and partly cloudy with light to moderate winds. In Tasmania, fine in the morning apart from isolated light showers inland, showers becoming more scattered statewide during the afternoon before contracting to the southeast and tending to drizzle in the evening. For South Australia, dry apart from the chance of light showers near the far western coast. The chance of an afternoon shower or thunderstorm about the Riverland, Murraylands and south of the northeast pastoral district. Mild near the coast but warm elsewhere. For Western Australia, showers and gusty thunderstorms over the Kimberley, Pilbara, northern parts of the interior inland, Gascoyne and most western parts of the southwest land division. Hot conditions in the southwest and the lower west. And in the Northern Territory, mostly sunny over the Simpson, southern Barkly and southern Lassiter districts. A chance of showers and thunderstorms elsewhere, higher about the northwest top end. Possible damaging wind gusts with thunderstorms across the western top end during the afternoon and the evening. Looking ahead to tomorrow's forecast for the capital cities, Brisbane, a possible shower, partly cloudy in Sydney, Canberra and Melbourne. Showers for Hobart, sunny in Adelaide and Perth, and in Darwin, a shower or two with a possible storm.
The top stories now on Weekend Breakfast, and Wallabies player Kurtley Beale will face court today over an alleged sexual assault last year. He's accused of sexually assaulting a 28-year-old woman in the toilets of a Bondi pub in December. The 34-year-old will appear at bail court in Parramatta.
Australian Olympian Peter Bowl has denied taking a banned substance after testing positive on an out-of-competition drug test. Bowl, who finished 4th in the 800 metres at the Tokyo Olympics, returned a positive reading for EPO in a test taken in October. He's been provisionally suspended from training and competing until the analysis of his secondary sample returns.
Google's parent company Alphabet is cutting 12,000 jobs across the organisation. The cuts, which represent about 6% of Google's global workforce, come days after rival Microsoft said it would lay off 10,000 workers. Both tech giants have blamed the faltering global economy for the layoffs.
And in another shock upset, Daniil Medvedev has been knocked out of the Australian Open. The 7th seed lost to the United States' Sebastian Korda in straight sets. Korda will face Poland's Hubert Hurkacz next for a spot in the quarterfinals. An 80 square metre artwork deemed a vital cultural record for the Kimberley's First Nations group has been saved from the Fitzroy River flood unscathed. The enormous canvas is an integral part of a long-running native title claim settled in 2018.
For more on this and the other big stories impacting First Nations peoples this week, we are now joined by ABC Indigenous reporter Tom Forrest. Welcome to Weekend Breakfast.
Fozzie and Dan, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome to Sydney. You're away from Outback Tom. Is this like a different Tom? Is this like a Sydney Tom now?
I guess it might be a bit of an identity crisis as I leave the Outback Tom part of me in the Kimberley. I'm still adjusting though. I would still say I've got a bit of Outback there.
Not quite urban Tom yet.
Not yet, not yet.
Fantastic. Listen, it's lovely to have you here. Talk to us about this beautiful canvas. I hadn't even known this canvas existed. It's beautiful. I'm so glad it got saved too.
It's absolutely incredible. And so with the recent floodings in the West Kimberley and the East Kimberley, particularly Fitzroy Crossing, there's an amazing photos and footage of this huge canvas being taken out by community members. And the reason it's so special, it was actually painted in 1996 and it was a part of a successful native title claim, but the traditional owners painted it just to express their connection to country. It was put up in museums and galleries and 2 decades later came back to the Kimberley. So this is a really vital and important part of the history of the Kimberley. And just to see the community come together and they flew it out to Broome was just absolutely amazing.
And for anyone who's not familiar, there are song lines and storylines, and that's that connection point, isn't it? It's understanding place and how everything connects together.
Absolutely. Not only is it a beautiful piece of art, but as you mentioned, Dan, it's this story in there. When the mob there, traditional owners can read that, and it tells just a vital part of the land, the country, connection to that too, and the different traditional owner groups around that area too. I guess just seeing that community come together, take it out is such a beautiful thing.
Oh, it's incredible, and it's such a beautiful canvas as well. We're going to stay with culture, of course. And you spoke to an all-female Indigenous dance group, and they're part of the Sydney Festival. Tell us about the dance group.
Yes, the Janawi Dancers. I was really lucky enough to go out the other day and capture the rehearsal of this new performance. It's an all-female dance group. It's done in Darug language, and it's all about the community and telling self-determined Darug stories. The performance was on last night at the Sydney Festival, and just a part of it, they're going to do the full performance in June at Carriage Works Sydney. But being, in the city now, and I guess getting the eastern states side of Indigenous stories is such a beautiful thing. And coming from the Kimberley to then and seeing that was just an amazing thing to see.
Is there a marked difference?
I guess each different group and different mobs have these different stories and different styles. And I'm not too familiar, I'm only new to these certain different areas. But I guess still there's that cultural connection between dance and telling stories. Seeing that from the Kimberley regions to the eastern side is just such a beautiful thing. So being a part of that, bit of a fly on the wall, with the camera and capturing those beautiful dance moves, I just think is such an important new performance. It's all in Darug language, and it's first of its kind for a full-length performance to be in that language.
And there's something really powerful, isn't there, about when people share their story through art, as we were talking about a moment ago, through dance, song, and even language that helps to bring everyone else that's not from that nation group in, but also to share that with all Australians.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and there's many stories, and it's hard to keep language alive in certain areas. So to do it through these performances, and also I guess it's teaching that younger generation too. We see that in a range of different things, but just passing that culture down, passing that language down, the dance, the stories, because it has been around for thousands and thousands of years. So any sort of new performance or storytelling art piece, I really love to get around that and I guess help show that to the wider community.
It's all part of the Australian fabric, really. Another thing that's part of the Australian fabric is rage. Isn't it?
Absolutely.
The show, Rage, that's what I'm talking about, not the actual feeling itself. But I do remember back in my younger day, and yes, at some point I was young, stumbling back home and then, after a night out and turning on TV and watching Rage, and that was a comfort for me. And the Rage scream, I have always wondered, how did that come about? Is it part of a song? Is it what happened? But you found out the story behind the Rage scream.
That's right. So a couple of years ago, I saw a journalist. He was from the ABC. His name's Mike Williams. He had found this woman. Her name's Denny Gordon. Yeah. And I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. And I sort of re-picked out the story, had a look at it, and then put a modern spin on it. So it was back in, when was it, 1987. Denny Gordon was an American actress. Yeah. She was working at the ABC, and someone just popped into the studio and said, oh, we need you for some voiceover work. It took a few minutes. They got her in, and she raged all over the place, as she said.
Was that it? All she had to do was scream rage. Was that it?
Basically, yeah, and a whole range of different things, just getting her to scream it around, and it took a few minutes. I guess it's still around now, and even this morning I saw Rage was on and I thought, oh, brilliant.
I know, yeah, it's great, isn't it? Give us your best Rage.
Oh, I think I can do the quiet one, not the loud one, but I think the end one goes Rage,
Imagine that in the diary from 10 to 10:15 doing the Rage scream then forevermore.
Yeah. And then get paid for it.
Absolutely, yeah. I always get really interested about these old different pieces of history, throughout the country, and I get set on these things. So when I saw, oh wow, someone's found, the story, I really wanted to I shaped it up into a portrait video and put it out to the new audience on TikTok and Instagram, etc. And just watching that vision when Mike Williams got her to recreate the Rage was incredible.
Yeah, what an incredible story. And thank you so much too for refashioning the story and for giving us all the other stories as well. Thanks so much, Tom, for coming back in.
Fazia and Dan, thanks for having me in. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. Time to take a look now at what else is making headlines in the newspapers and online. The Saturday paper looks at Western Australia's youth justice crisis. It reports that a New Year's Eve raid at Banksia Hill Youth Detention Centre was the culmination of an escalating crisis in which vulnerable children are denied the basic rights of education, recreation and restorative justice.
The Guardian has an explainer on what's fueling Australia's rental nightmare. After unprecedented growth, there are signs the market is beginning to ease, but many experts predict prices will stay high for a while.
The New York Times explores the tech industry's recent job cuts and how workers who are experiencing their first economic downturn are reacting.
ABC Online asks, are private schools better than public schools? Well, over the past 10 years, the proportion of high school students in government schools has dropped, while the number of children attending private high schools is growing.
The Age looks into why fatal heart attacks have surged in Australia. The pandemic has caused an increase in fatal cardiac arrests as delayed care, and COVID-19's damaging effect on the heart drives a major uptick in serious heart issues.
And in the Sydney Morning Herald, 34 Sydney-siders have forked out almost $12,000 a year for unlimited parking at Bondi and Bronte Beach car parks. Well, that's the going rate for a beach parking permit from Waverley Council if you don't live or pay rates in the area. Isn't that incredible, Dan? I mean, the fact is, you pack up the family, you pack up your swimmers, you pack up your picnic, and then you head over to the beach, and then you have to pay that much money. And it's one of these annoying things too. Once you're comfortable on the sand, and then you realise, oh, I got to go pay my parking.
Keep
paying for my parking over and over and over.
So I wonder if that creates a whole economy around it, where the people buy passes and then hock them off on eBay or some other...
What are you starting? Look at you, entrepreneur yourself. Oh, that's fantastic.
Well, I wonder if that's why the prices are so high.
He's going to copyright that idea now, you know.
I'll be getting a call from the council saying, Dan, we need to talk. Yeah. Stat. Speaking of talking, David Chow is back with us in the studio. David, welcome back. How are the markets looking?
I was looking like a pretty strong day on Wall Street, which should be finishing up pretty soon. So having a quick check at the figures, we can see that the gains range from 0.8% for the Dow Jones to about 2.5% for the Nasdaq, thanks to a strong tech rebound. And in currency markets, it's also looking pretty good for the Aussie dollar, which has lifted sharply to 69.7 US cents. But it is still below its peak earlier this week. Earlier this week, the Aussie dollar hit a 9-month high above 70 US cents. But it has come down from that because of changed expectations that people think the Reserve Bank might not lift interest rates as high as initially expected. So according to market pricing, only a 62% chance of a rate hike now in February at their next meeting. So for more analysis on rate hike expectations, let's bring in Angela Jackson from Impact Economics. Morning, Ange.
Good morning, David. How are you going?
Good. Nice to see you. So I got a question for you. How high do you reckon interest rates will go this year in Australia? And what will the RBA be looking at if you were to cast your crystal ball out and in order to make its decision?
It's really difficult to say, David. I think, the market had been expecting maybe rates would continue to rise up towards around 4%. Remembering last year, of course, that the Reserve Bank increased interest rates by 3 percentage points, a huge increase, one of the fastest tightenings that we've ever seen in Australia. So for those of us out there with mortgages on that variable rate, we've already experienced that hit. And then there are a lot of homeowners, of course, who are on those fixed interest rates. So they fixed when those rates were really, really low, and they're going to face the full impact of those increases that have occurred over the last 12 months in 2023. How high will they go? It's going to depend on how the economy responds. So the Reserve Bank's going to be watching very carefully. This week they'll get another read on inflation. So they're going to be looking to see, are those inflationary pressures coming off? If they are, they'll probably hold their fire. They're also looking for those broader impacts. So they're not trying to cause a recession. So they're going to be looking at the impacts in terms of the labour market, in terms of retail spending, to really gauge how the Australian economy is responding to these hikes. They've got a really careful balancing act between trying to bring that inflation rate back down towards the 2 to 3% range while not pushing the economy into a recession.
Now, looking overseas, Ange, some interesting data came out from China a few days ago showing its economy grew by 3% last year, one of its worst results on record, no doubt worsened by its COVID outbreak there. And its population in China also shrank by 850,000 people. So is this a concerning trend for Australia in the long term?
Well, look, we always knew this was coming in terms of China, the ageing of the population. And what has happened, I think, with COVID is we've seen that's probably come forward somewhat in terms of that demographic shift. It is a concern for China. The lack of population growth and the ageing of population we know does act to sort of pull down economic growth going forward. And we've also seen, obviously, China's kind of reaching that ceiling, if you like, of a middle-income country. It obviously is a communist country, command and control. It doesn't have the sort of free, open press that an advanced economy needs. So there's a few things, I think, pulling China's growth down, which has a huge impact for Australia. If we look at our economic story over the last 20, 30 years, it has been linked to China's success, our economic success. So there are certainly headwinds ahead. The Chinese government, however, for the next 12 months is relatively optimistic. They think that opening up the economy, the lifting of COVID restrictions will fuel higher economic growth. But those long-term trends certainly do represent a significant risk to China's economy, but also globally.
All right, so yeah, there are some people betting there will be a rebound later this year for the Chinese economy. So short term, okay, longer term, maybe some of those storm clouds you mentioned. Yeah. Now, sticking overseas, Ange, there's been a gathering of the world's richest people and world leaders, and that's wrapped up in the snow town of Davos, Switzerland. There were also some pretty gloomy discussions that were had about the economy there.
Yeah, look, indeed. So, yeah, as we're enjoying the beach and the summer weather here in Australia, internationally, the international CEOs are all gathering in Switzerland, and some sort of snowy bit of skiing possibly in between meetings to discuss where they think the world economy is going and what the major challenges are. Now, first and foremost, it was obviously climate change, which I think is going to be top of the agenda probably for a generation in terms of as our economy transitions and representing those and approaching those risks internationally. But obviously, internationally, everybody is dealing with this high inflation environment and dealing with the fact that their central banks are increasing interest rates and access to credit is becoming a lot harder. So that was top of discussions. Now, people are a little bit more optimistic than they had been. We're seeing some improvements in terms of that inflation figure globally. Some of those pressures have come off. And we're also seeing some of those energy price pressures coming off as well, particularly in Europe, as they transition away from that heavy reliance on Russia, which has really driven those higher energy prices, and also have had a unseasonally warm winter, which has lowered energy demand in Europe. So there's some optimism around, but generally speaking, everybody's expecting to see much slower growth this year, about half the rate of last year, and real risks of that global recession.
Angela Jackson, thank you very much for your insights once again.
Thank you very much, Dave.
So that was Angela Jackson, an economist from Impact Economics, talking about the world's economic affairs. So that Swiss gathering of world leaders, very interesting. So a bit of a gloomy outlook. At the very least, they're expecting slower economic growth. Some are even forecasting a global recession. But I guess in the short term, China's economic rebound from reopening should definitely help bolster growth worldwide to that extent.
Yeah, we'll be watching the ripple effects of all of those. David, thank you.
Thanks.
And in breaking news, New Zealand's Education Minister Chris Hipkins is set to become the country's next Prime Minister. Mr Hipkins was the sole nominee for the Labor Party leadership and will be confirmed as leader by the party's MPs at a meeting tomorrow afternoon. It follows the resignation of Jacinda Ardern earlier this week. And this is exactly what was forecast earlier when you were speaking with Madeline Chapman, the author.
Yeah,
of the book about Jacinda Ardern.
Madeline Chapman, of course, being the biographer and author of Jacinda Ardern, a new kind of leader. And when we spoke to her earlier this morning, she had predicted that Chris Hipkins is the frontrunner and would probably be the replacement for Jacinda Ardern, who resigned, as you mentioned a little earlier this week. And he will, of course, be taking the Labor Party into the elections in October later this year. It's something I think all of New Zealand is definitely waiting for, given that the Labor Party isn't doing so well in New Zealand at this stage. But it will be interesting to see if Chris Hipkins can actually change that for the Labor Party and perhaps steer it to another victory later in the year.
Yeah, heading towards a third term is what they'll be seeking. Big policy agenda that's on the table. There are a lot of environmental discussions happening and also, of course, like most countries, about the economy, as we were just hearing from David.
That's right.
And in terms of Chris Hipkins, we know that he has been a very strong supporter of Jacinda Ardern. They've worked very closely together. Education where he's been for the last several years.
Absolutely. He also supported her in her measures during the COVID pandemic as well. Very stringent COVID measures that she had imposed. If you remember, New Zealand basically locked itself out from, like many other countries, Australia included, locked itself out from the rest of the world during that time, during the pandemic when it first started. Chris Hipkins was one of her strongest supporters in that, implementing that measure as well. So it'll be interesting to see what Chris Hipkins is like in the Prime Minister role. And
we'll certainly be hearing and seeing a lot more of Chris Hipkins, particularly over this weekend as that looks set to be formally endorsed tomorrow. But we'll come back to that throughout the weekend. Well, living in rural areas can often mean not having access to everyday services such as hairdressing.
Oh my God, how do you survive without your hairdresser? But post-COVID, industry groups say many hairdressers are actually leaving the city, and it's certainly been a boom for one small mining town in central Queensland.
For the people of Tieri in Queensland's Central Highlands, getting a haircut used to mean a 2-hour round trip.
Whatever you'd like to do.
That's until sisters Jamie Lee O'Reilly and Lisa Franco moved into town.
I really thought we would be out and about chasing people, but they have just welcomed us with open arms.
It's a game changer for Tracy Ryder, who also has bowel cancer.
My hair is one thing that I've kept, and every 2 weeks I need a haircut, so it's been wonderful.
It's also somewhere new to socialise.
Definitely need that because it is isolating because a lot of people leave their families to come and live out here, so you don't have that sort of support, so you really rely on the friendships.
I'm pretty stoked to be able to do that for the women of the mining town.
Statistics show there is a national shortage of hairdressers, but there are more of them in regional areas. Almost half of them live outside of capital cities. The industry's peak body says a regional lifestyle is a big draw card.
Whether it's even rent or there's less barriers in getting into business. I think the downside, though, is sometimes the supply chain. So even for my own salon, it takes a good 4 days for me to get my stock often.
No matter what the challenges are, Jamie Lee and Lisa plan to stay in Tieri long term.
I'm here for them, that's what I want to do.
Katrina Bevan, ABC News, Tieri.
That's community right there. Well, it's a play that'll spark ferocious debate. That's what an Ensemble Theatre's new offering promises as it presents the world premiere of Broadcast Coup on January 26.
It is an all too familiar #MeToo story of abuse of power and a lack of accountability among public figures in the radio industry. Well, Weekend Breakfast is very fortunate to have writer and broadcaster Melanie Tate in the studio with us. Welcome to Weekend Breakfast.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I didn't realise you have history with Dan.
Oh, way back when we were baby reporters in Darwin. Or we just leave it there.
But we've known each other for a long time.
Yes.
Listen, you've been in the media for quite some time too. This is a really interesting play in that I wondered whether you wrote this play based on your experience and perhaps maybe of a certain character you may have known of in the media. Spill.
It's so interesting. I think a lot of people are going to come to this play and try and figure out who the guy is, like who the radio presenter is. But to be honest, and I probably shouldn't say this because I think it would sell more tickets if I said, come along and guess, But actually the character in the play is really an amalgamation of all sorts of little stories, that you hear, that I've heard over the years. I mean, as you both know, as journalists are great gossips. So we tend to hear no. That's a secret. Maybe we'll keep that quiet. But you hear these stories over the years and I just sort of banked them. And I got to a stage when because this play was written a few years ago, we were closed by the first lockdown. We're in rehearsals with the first lockdown. I wanted to explore the more grey areas, the characters that weren't quite as obvious. If we think of the Harvey Weinsteins, etc., that's all very obvious. They're very obvious sort of baddies. And I wanted to look at a character where the lines were a little bit greyer, where he was sort of a little bit, greyer, I guess, not so black and white.
Is that where there's that blurring, is it, between what is acceptable, what's not? And I think what I kept coming back to as I was looking and thinking about this was about that the way that power, the role of power in all of this?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, I think, any woman who's ever been in a workplace ever, and you know, this play could be set anywhere. It could be set in a bowling alley or anywhere like that.
It's universal, yeah.
It's universal, yeah. I think most women in their careers at some stage will have had a time, not even necessarily where they've maybe been sexually harassed, but where they feel uncomfortable about something, where they feel like they can't speak up, or where they feel like somebody has used their power in order to, and maybe not even realising that they're doing it, you know, to sort of make somebody feel a bit uncomfortable in their workplays.
It's so complex. There's so many issues that's involved in this as well. And and one thing, you know, your play and stories, TV stories like Morning Wars,
yes,
that really showed the complexity of the, you know, the power imbalance as well. I think we have a clip from the Morning Wars that I just want to show you, and I want to chat to you about it.
And then suddenly, one day, you decided to start paying attention to me, which made me feel like maybe I was really good at my job. I didn't go to your room because I wanted... That didn't even cross my mind as a possibility. But once we were there, it happened so fast, I froze.
Did you freeze or did you try to leave? Which one was that?
I didn't know.
No. You can't blame me for things that you regret in your past. You're a strong woman. You are empowered.
When Mitch Kessler decides he's having sex with you, you feel pretty powerless.
Jesus Christ! Stop it! Stop!
You know, the complexities of it all.
So Morning Wars is a really interesting one to bring up. And I must confess that during COVID, when it came out, I nearly died because my play that I had written, you know, a long time before is basically up until... Morning Wars starts after Mitch Kessler has been sacked. My play is up until the moment of whether that guy gets sacked or not. But what's interesting about Morning Wars is they kind of let us as an audience off the hook because they made Mitch Kessler a rapist. So therefore, boom, he's a baddie. You know, it's easy to see him as a baddie.
Black and white.
Black and white. Whereas the Mike King, which, oh my gosh, can you believe that? Like he's a radio presenter, and I accidentally called him Mike King. It wasn't some great dramaturgical move. It was an accident, and I feel a little bit embarrassed about it. Mike King, my character, he's not a rapist. He's not a sexual abuser. So therefore, you know, all these questions will be asked at the end of the play about what transpires about him, because, you know, he's not those things, and yet he's other things that make women unable to fulfil their potential in a workplace. And so I think there's going to be really heated, and we've found in workshops and in audience viewings that we've had that generationally it tends to be a very interesting reaction to this play. It's like anybody under 40 seems to be like, off with him, you know, and anybody not over 40, but, you know, like just generationally sometimes people are like, I don't understand what he did. So we're really going to have some great knockout fights in the theatre at the end.
Is that because it has been normalised, that sort of behaviour and the use of power?
I think so, and I think that there's also a real, like he says it in that clip there, you know, you're a strong woman, you could have stood up for yourself, you could have, you know, there's this onus on women to say, go away, you know, enough with you. So I think there's a bit of that as well. But the thing about this play too, you know, we're talking about the very serious issues with it, but it's also, I hope, I mean, I'm saying this now, I hope it's very funny as well. Because, you know, radio people, journalists are very funny. It's a very funny world to be in.
Well, we've got a dark sense of humour.
We sure do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But obviously, listen, it sounds fantastic. And we're looking forward
I hope
to
you'll
seeing
come.
it. Oh, definitely. I'm there. That's Melanie Tate there, writer of Broadcast Cool, which is on the 26th of January right through to the 4th of March, Ensemble Theatre, part of the Sydney Festival.
Yes, thanks, Fazzy.
And of course, if this story has raised any issues for you, you can always get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline, 1-800-RESPECT, which is 1-800-737-732. We will have more on Weekend Breakfast in just a moment. Stay with us.